One. Hi, we're live and live with Dr. Kurt Jefferson again. And today we're going to get curious on social media and leadership. And I'm really curious. I just introduced you as Dr. Kurt Jefferson. I'm going right at Kurt. So anyway, Kurt, yeah, I'm really curious on your perspective, both with your background. I'll let you give a little bit on your background so people can get familiar. But even your current leadership position on social media. And where does that social media and leadership come together? And of course, how does curiosity work into all of this?
Well, thank you, Matt, and I'm delighted to be with you on your program again, as always. I think when you look at social media, and I think back to when you and I literally worked arm in arm in an international institute in the middle of the United States at a small college for many years. I'll never forget the first time I was asked to put a Twitter account together, and I had no idea what a hashtag was, what 40 characters meant. It was literally speaking a completely foreign language to me. And I remember the marketing director at our institution was trying to explain this to me, and I was like, I mean, can you speak, a more foreign language? I wingdings. I mean, I was blown out of the water. But as I within another year, I was really comfortable with social media, and of course, as someone who is a Gen Xer, those born between 65 and 83. And I'm on the very front end of that, by the way. So I'm almost a baby.
So we're the same generation then. All right.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
And it's interesting, and I bring that up as a Gen Xer, trying to adapt to social media. A lot of us scratch our heads, but yet we're now getting a lot of our news from social media. We're getting our entertainment. My wife and I sit in bed at the end of the night, and she's showing me cute pictures of our grandkids on Instagram, and then I'm showing her news stories about things going on in the world, and talking about the St. Louis Cardinals on Instagram, and it's not coming on NBC, ABC, ESPN. It's coming on, and I'm not saying I don't have access to those channels, even on social media, but for me, from a leadership standpoint, I find myself, even at the ripe old age of 57, becoming more connected deeper, one, to social media from a leadership perspective, but two, connected deeper to social media just from a content and a knowledge and a growth perspective. And I know as we've talked in the past, I've given back at our former institution, we would talk and faculty would say, well, why would you ever allow a student to use Wikipedia? And the same was with social media. Yeah. You now, on all of the APA guidelines and everything else, still teaching doctoral students myself, you can cite, and you should cite, social media sources and pages and things like that. And this is no longer a kind of problem for academicians and leaders. I mean, we still have to point to students, you have to get on X and understand these things. So I, for example, I just came out of a meeting with graduate faculty at my institution here in Louisville, Spalding University, and we were talking about recruitment of prospective students. And one of the ways that we now recruit is, the use of social media. And students are expecting not only social media, and I was talking with a colleague this morning about it, and he was saying, I've got a social media page. He says, I'm not very savvy at it, but I've got a social media page going for my program, which is in the health sciences, health professions. But now I'm going on and commenting on the undergraduate social media pages to get them to see, oh, we have a program in this area. Would you be interested in your comments about Yogi Bear or Disney or whatever in your honors program or whatever at Spalding is relevant to what we're doing in this health professions program. So I do think, and we talked about Coach Prime, the genius of him using social media is adding value. And there's the real issue here is not just a leadership issue, but it's a value proposition. And us, I mean, not you, but me as an old curmudgeon, we can poo-poo it all we want, but the reality is there's time and money that is moving along here.
Yeah.
And what you're really interested in scientifically is curiosity. And I think
Hmm.
it helps stimulate people's curiosity by allowing them to get a snapshot in real time, like kind of what we're doing right this very moment with this discussion in real time, that they're not waiting around for something to be delivered in a online or through an email or even through the postal system, if that makes sense.
Of course. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. No, this
So,
is, no,
yeah,
go on.
go ahead, please. I'd like to hear your reactions.
No, no, no. You brought me back. I wrote a couple notes here. A couple different things is one, the time machine. I'll talk about going back to the days of back at Westminster. But it was interesting too, the time machine, both the present time too, because I think yesterday was the first the 1 year anniversary of X. And when you're talking about social media, about how you're sharing about from Instagram and from this and then that, I was reflecting on how just in the last few months, I've pretty much dropped, everything's been consolidated on X, and it's been wild. I never thought this was possible, but again, my relationship and approach to technology is very different than others. I think a lot of times people like the abundance of technology and all of this. I'm still a bit of a Luddite, right? Is that the, am I
Yeah,
Luddite?
yeah,
All right. So I'm looking at how can it simplify things. And so to me, the attraction isn't like, oh, social media, all of this stuff. It's like, hey, I want just one thing. Like I want to, if it would, make my toast and, in the morning, I'd have it do that as well. Like, so my appeal might be different than others, but I was just reveling or being, fascinated that I think I mentioned I was about to give up all of social media, partly because it's
right.
spread so across. And now, again, I'm going to sound like I'm an ex-salesman. I have nothing, no relationship with, but now that we can do phone calls and video calls, we'll be able to live stream like this in the future. It just seems like there's fewer banking, I know, coming in the future. I think you're familiar with with WeChat, I think, right? And the ability
Yep,
of that. They just announced they basically want to be WeChat, but a little better. Just the convenience. I know you've been in China when and
yeah,
either used it yourself or saw
yep,
how just the ease of life, if you will. I know there's you talk about the other side of it, but
yeah.
just how simple it made things for people. I think seeing something like, X, formerly Twitter, could become that is pretty fascinating. I'm curious how leaders will and not just leaders as individuals, but you mentioned Spalding, like as a university, might kind of benefit from this kind of streamlining of life. But and just kind of what's that mean like with leadership and like the streamlining of things. But you
Yeah,
you
yeah.
mentioned the oh sorry, go on.
No, no,
I'll
no.
come back to
Please
my
go ahead.
do you have a comment on that? I don't want to interrupt you on
No, real quick. I was just going to say I find it your the approach is as much about functionality
yeah.
and operational. And as a dean, I can respect this big time because really, our work is quite operations oriented.
Yeah.
We are in the weeds, guiding faculty and staff and students on all kinds of topics and all kinds of areas. And this is the same thing. If you can simplify down what you're trying to accomplish and use the tools. And it reminds me a little bit, and
Well,
we've had a lot of conversations with colleagues about things like blockchain and
yep.
your toothbrush making money for you, or a coffee mug, to
Yeah.
give Spalding a shameless plug, making money for you, which is mind-boggling. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. That is kind of where the technology interfaces with the concepts of what this whole social media thing was originally planned to do.
And, and it's funny what it was originally planned to do. That's a great way to put it, because the other memory that you put in my head, and it's funny because I'm glad you shared all of this, because it brings back to just to illustrate the consistency in my thought about about what I want out of technology. Is what originally brought me to X, formerly Twitter. It was Twitter at the time. I was one. I guess I was kind of early on, but I wasn't like one of the first ones. I know I resisted for years because, again, Luddite. I'm not interested. What got me on, what said, hey, I'm willing to try this out, and I'll never forget, was I got on because I wanted to use it as a means for my students to send me their homework.
Yeah.
So we talk about the uses of social media and the uses and all this. And for years, that's the only way I really used Twitter. Again, Twitter at the time, X now, but it was because for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to see how much I could move away from, and this is 2013, I guess, how much we can move away from hand. I always wanted to buck tradition. Like how could we move away from the handing in the paper, the paper, the physical papers, to more of an a electronic system.
Absolutely.
But I also wanted them to deal with real world consequences, even as a freshman writing papers, that you're not just going to turn in your writing to me, you're going to turn it into potentially the world. That, yeah, your professor's going to read it, but I wanted to try to add a level of accountability to what they were writing so that they knew that, people other than just their professor.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's brilliant. It broadens the audience.
Yeah.
It has really interesting. And if you recall, about 2014, I did my first kind of live class on Facebook. So I had an actual class session because I had students in Arizona in the Phoenix area, which you and I went out and visited that area. And when I think I was interacting with those students, and then we had the students back in Missouri. The Missouri students were all in the classroom. I had a couple that sat in their residence hall rooms and did the class, but we did it live on Facebook. So it wasn't really what I call a Facebook Live event, although we did one of those. It was interesting because the students were doing the class typing through Facebook. And so some were in coffee shops, some were in the residence halls. A few came to the physical classroom in our library at the time. And to me, I thought, here's what social media actually does well, is it makes students curious about physically being in different spaces and being able to hold, kind of interactive sessions, but also it exposes their ideas to a broader group of people, their friends on Facebook who aren't in the class per se. And the class was about innovation. It's largely inspired by you and curiosity. And so they're sharing ideas that are related to the kind of things we're talking about right this very minute, but it was through social media. And in a way, it's like what you've talked about in the past, Matt, historically, these big MOOCs and some of these other types of things that went on YouTube and other places. In many ways, this is kind of a good forum for, one, getting curious, two, trying to test out new ideas as a leader. So for me, it's interesting, and this is where I wanted to bring in the Israeli-Gaza conflict, and I don't mean to be a downer by bringing that in, but it's interesting to me that war is now playing out on social media. And I taught Middle Eastern politics and history for many years. I taught European politics. But what's interesting to me is that all of the horrific to say activities are caught on largely TikTok, which is tied, speaking of WeChat, the Chinese owned social media source. And yet, if you're not on TikTok or Telegram or one of these other things, you can't keep up with what's going on because the other medias are too mediums, I guess, are too slow to respond in real time.
Again, I have no affiliation with X, but I've been getting quite a bit live stream. I find the information, but to your point, I don't even have TikTok, but I guess it's similar. I guess TikTok videos, but there are I guess social media, in whichever you choose, is universal, or across the board outperforming traditional media, right? That's
absolutely that's the upshot, and a great point. And I think it takes to a new level, and you're more of an expert in communication and writing and languages and so forth than I am, but it takes to a new level the nature of a propaganda war between countries in the West and the non-Western areas. And I find that as a political scientist fascinating. But back to the real topic here, which is social media and leadership. I do think and one, I did want to say X is also a great source for making sure you can stay up on some of this stuff.
Well,
But I do
just quickly on that
think,
too, just I forget the community notes. If you haven't checked out the community notes, to my knowledge, it's the only platform that has an open source kind of fact check in real time. So that's one of the benefits is I can see
nice.
get all the news, and then you can kind of some of it gets noted or whatever else, but there's kind of
Right.
ongoing commentary that does make it unique. Yeah.
Oh, and that's good. I mean, I think this goes back to the Wikipedia problem from
Yeah.
1999 or whatever, 2000, that if you're dealing with news and fake news, and
Mhm.
I know terms like fake news are almost as bad as ideological labels, because now we don't know actually what
It,
they mean unless they're
they've all eaten their own
contextualized.
tails at this point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a great point, and I'm glad to hear that X is doing that, because to me, this is kind of the direction that, going back to my theme, and I mean, this is my political science hat, the
Yeah.
democratization of information, that for anybody to become a source, and a legitimate, accountable source, as you're saying, you know, people are looking for new content, fresh content, innovation, and they
Yeah.
want it in real time. This is one of the discussions that I just had with faculty about graduate
Yeah.
recruitment, that I was in a meeting in Columbus, Ohio this week, and it was fascinating, because what's happening is the compression of time and space. We've
Mhm.
got now graduate students, 65% are millennials, um, 18% are in my generation X, and then
Yeah.
another at 19 or so in Gen Z. So you have three different types of
Right.
generations who are going to graduate school now, who
Interesting.
all come from very different, some who are old school, they want face to face, some want
Mhm.
hybrid, some want nothing but asynchronous online as modalities, but they all want to learn. And,
Yep.
and I would say probably 75% understand and don't have a problem with technology and social media. But the reality is, they all want something a little bit different. And so the key and the difficulty for grad programs today is, we cannot do one size fits all for
Yeah.
every single thing. And that's what sticks. Sometimes those of us who run graduate areas and programs, et cetera, don't understand that we have a great product, we have a great course, we have a great program, but we might not, in one part of the country, there may be folks who are saying, hey, I'd really like that to be hybrid, where I can do 90% of it online and maybe show up on a weekend to the campus to meet my cohorts and my professor. Whereas in another part of the world or country, they're saying, no, I don't have the time to do anything face to face. I want it all fully asynchronous.
Yeah.
So that to me is the challenge. Is the customer is now a very different. It's the tradition of any service. Education is a great example. The demand for what was tried and true for 100 years is no longer there,
It's
and
becoming more service oriented, it sounds like. Is that
exactly.
yeah.
And you would say the same thing about the nature of services, the nature of
Mhm.
business, the nature of other things. Innovation has changed, and
Yeah.
and I think, I'm not trying to say that you and I are liberal arts guys. We believe in learning for learning's sake completely,
Yeah.
but nowadays we're in the minority. There are a lot of
Yeah.
people saying, "Look, if I can't get a good job with that degree, I'm not going to pursue that degree."
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So I know we're close to out of time, but
Yeah. No, this is what I think. This gives us a lot to follow up on the next time we have another curiosity conversation. We should hopefully next Friday be able to follow up. Love picking your brain on all the insights from your leadership position today on social media, and yeah, maybe next Friday let's talk some sports. I'm curious to get back to some of your insights on leadership, curiosity, and athletics.
yeah, I would love to talk about how the Arizona Diamondbacks were the 21st best paid team out of 30 in Major League Baseball, and they're playing for the whole
Yeah.
shebang against the Texas Rangers. So, I mean, it's interesting to see that the best laid plans of the the paymasters don't always play out. And I think that's a story in and of itself when it comes to leadership, that when you see teams emerge out of nowhere, third or second in their league, and they get to play for the championship, that's the World Series in this case. That's quite interesting. And, maybe there's
and which leaders are going to be bold enough to copy or take notes on what they did and cut payroll, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, thanks. Have a great week and stay curious.